Derek's fingers dug into Lena's arm so hard she felt the bruise forming beneath her skin. "You smile when I tell you to smile," he hissed through clenched teeth, his grip twisting the flesh above her elbow, while 200 of Chicago's wealthiest guests clinked champagne glasses just 10 feet away. "You embarrass me tonight, and I swear to God, Lena, you won't make it to the car." She forced her lips upward, tears burning behind her eyes, and in that moment across the glittering ballroom, she locked eyes with the most dangerous man in the city and made a decision that would change everything. If you want to see how Lena escapes the nightmare standing right beside her, subscribe to the channel, follow her story all the way to the end, and comment the end. Lena Marlowe had learned to read Derek Haynes the way a sailor reads the sky before a storm. She knew the tightening of his jaw, the way his left hand curled into a fist inside his pocket, the slight flaring of his nostrils that meant violence was simmering just beneath the surface. Tonight, standing in the grand ballroom of the Langford Hotel, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and the low murmur of old money conversations, every single one of those signals was firing at once. "Stand up straight," Derek muttered without looking at her. His hand found the small of her back, pressing hard enough that she arched forward involuntarily. "And stop fidgeting with your dress. You look like you've never worn anything decent in your life." Lena swallowed the response that burned on her tongue. The dress was borrowed from her friend Cassie, a midnight blue gown that had cost more than 3 months of Lena's salary at the clinic. Cassie had pressed it into her hands that afternoon with worried eyes and whispered words. "If he hurts you tonight, Lena, you call me. I don't care what time it is." But Lena wouldn't call. She never called. That was the pattern, and she knew it as well as she knew the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Derek would rage, she would endure, and by morning he would bring her coffee in bed with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands, swearing it would never happen again. And she would believe him. Or rather, she would tell herself she believed him because the alternative was admitting that her entire life had become a cage she had walked into willingly. "Derek," she said softly, keeping her voice light and careful. "Mr. Chen is standing near the bar. Should we go introduce ourselves?" Derek's eyes swept the room and landed on the silver-haired Chinese businessman surrounded by a small circle of admirers. His expression shifted in an instant, the cruelty replaced by calculation, the anger tucked away behind his perfectly practiced smile. That transformation never failed to terrify Lena. The speed of it, the completeness of it. It meant that every moment of kindness he had ever shown her was just as manufactured as the one he was about to perform now. "Let me do the talking," he said. "And for God's sake, look happy." They crossed the room together, Derek's arm locked around her waist like a vice. Lena had perfected the art of moving gracefully while being steered like a puppet. She kept her shoulders back, her chin up, her lips curved in a smile that felt like a wound. She had become so good at pretending that sometimes she forgot what her real face looked like. "Mr. Chen," Derek said, extending his hand with the kind of warmth that made Lena's stomach turn. "Derek Haynes, I've been looking forward to meeting you all evening. I believe my firm sent over a proposal last month regarding the Eastbridge development." Mr. Chen regarded Derek with polite but measured interest. He shook the offered hand briefly, his eyes flickering to Lena for a moment, before returning to Derek. "Yes, I recall the proposal. My team reviewed it." "And?" Derek's smile didn't waver, but Lena felt his fingers pressing deeper into her hip. Mr. Chen took a slow sip of his drink. "It was ambitious, but I'm afraid the numbers didn't align with our current investment strategy. We've decided to go in a different direction." The silence that followed lasted only 2 seconds, but to Lena, it felt like an eternity. She could feel the shift in Derek's body, the sudden rigidity, the coiled tension in his arm. His smile remained fixed on his face, but his eyes went cold. "I see," Derek said, his voice still smooth. "Well, perhaps we could discuss the specifics. I'm confident that if you take another look, you'll find that—" "I appreciate the enthusiasm, Mr. Haynes," Mr. Chen interrupted gently, "but the decision has been made. I wish you the best of luck with the project." He offered a polite nod, then turned back to his companions, effectively ending the conversation. Derek stood frozen for a full 3 seconds. Lena counted them in her head, because she had learned that counting was the only thing that kept her from spiraling when the explosion was imminent. 1. His jaw clenched. 2. His breathing changed. 3. He turned away from Mr. Chen, and his hand seized her elbow with bruising force. "Let's go," he said through his teeth. He pulled her across the ballroom toward the corridor near the restrooms, moving fast enough that she had to take quick, stumbling steps to keep up. The moment they were around the corner, away from the eyes of the crowd, he shoved her against the wall. "What did you do?" he snarled. Lena's back hit the wall hard enough to knock the breath out of her. "What, Derek, I didn't—" "You stood there like a dead fish. You didn't smile, you didn't engage, you didn't do a single goddamn thing to help me close that deal." His face was inches from hers, his breath hot and sour with champagne. "Do you have any idea how much money I just lost? Do you have any idea what this means? Derek, he said the numbers didn't align. That's not something I could have—" His hand slammed against the wall beside her head, and she flinched so hard her teeth clicked together. "Don't you dare make excuses. You stood there like a mannequin in a borrowed dress, and you made me look like a fool." Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel the familiar trembling starting in her hands, the cold sweat forming on the back of her neck. This was the moment. This was always the moment. The tipping point where Derek's anger became something physical, something she would wear on her skin for days afterward. "I'm sorry," she whispered, because she had learned that apologizing even for things that weren't her fault was the fastest way to diffuse him. Derek stared at her for a long moment, his nostrils flaring, his hands shaking. Then he stepped back, straightening his jacket with a sharp tug. "Fix your face. We're going back out there, and you're going to smile and you're going to charm every single person I introduce you to, or I swear, Lena, you will regret it when we get home." He turned and walked back toward the ballroom without waiting for her. Lena pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes, willing her breathing to slow. Her arm throbbed where his fingers had dug in. She could already picture the bruises, 5 oval marks that she would cover with concealer in the morning the way she always did. She had tried to leave. She had tried 4 times in the last 8 months. The first time she had packed a bag while Derek was at work and driven to her mother's house in Indiana. He had shown up 12 hours later with flowers and tears and promises, and her mother had looked at him with sympathetic eyes and said, "Everyone deserves a second chance, sweetheart." The second time she had made it to a women's shelter, but Derek had called 37 times in 2 hours, and each voicemail had been more desperate, more threatening, until the last one was a calm, terrifying whisper. "If you don't come home, I will find you, and I will make sure no one can help you." The third time she had gone to the police. The officer had taken her statement, looked at her bruises, and asked if maybe she had provoked him. She had walked out of the station feeling more defeated than before. The fourth time, she simply hadn't had the energy to try. Lena opened her eyes and looked down the corridor toward the ballroom. Through the doorway, she could see the glittering crowd, the moving bodies, the kaleidoscope of wealth and power that had nothing to do with her. She was 29 years old. She had a nursing degree she hadn't used in 2 years because Derek didn't want her working, and she had exactly $412 in a savings account he didn't know about. She pushed off the wall and walked back into the ballroom. Derek had already found his next target, a tall woman in a red dress who worked for some investment firm. He was leaning toward her with his practiced smile, gesturing expansively, and Lena knew she was supposed to join him to stand beside him and play the role of the adoring girlfriend. But something held her in place, a hesitation, a tiny fracture in the wall of obedience she had built around herself. She stood near the edge of the dance floor and let her gaze drift across the room. That was when she noticed him. He was standing near the far wall with 2 men flanking him like bodyguards, because that was exactly what they were. He held a glass of whiskey in one hand, his posture relaxed, almost lazy. But there was nothing lazy about the way the crowd gave him space. People moved around him the way water moves around a rock in a river, naturally and without thought. He wore a black suit that fit like it had been tailored by angels, and his dark hair was swept back from a face that managed to be both beautiful and dangerous at the same time. Lena didn't know his name, but she had heard the whispers that had rippled through the ballroom when he arrived. Words like Salvatore and family and don't make eye contact. She had felt the shift in the room's energy, the way certain men stood straighter and certain women looked away. She should have been afraid of him. She should have turned back to Derek and played her part like a good puppet. But fear requires comparison, and Lena had already met the monster who lived in her house and slept in her bed. What was one more? Derek's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp and insistent. "Lena, get over here." She turned and saw him beckoning her with a tight smile, his eyes promising punishment. The woman in the red dress was watching with polite curiosity. Lena's feet began moving toward him automatically the way they always did. Step after obedient step. And then Derek reached for her arm. His fingers closed around the same bruised spot, squeezing with deliberate cruelty, and something inside Lena cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked the way ice cracks before it gives way with a sound that only the one standing on it can hear. "Let go of me," she said. The words were so quiet that Derek almost didn't hear them. But he did, and his eyes widened with genuine surprise. Lena never talked back. Lena never resisted. That was one of the rules, unspoken but absolute, and she had never broken it in front of other people. "What did you say?" His voice dropped to that dangerous register, the one that usually made her shrink. "I said let go of me." His grip tightened. "You're making a scene." "No," Lena said, and she could feel her own voice shaking, but she kept going. "You're making a scene. You've been hurting me all night, and I'm done." Derek's face flushed a deep, ugly red. He leaned close, his lips brushing her ear. "You walk away from me right now, and I promise you there is nowhere you can go where I won't find you. You think anyone in this room gives a damn about you. You're nothing, Lena. You're nothing without me." Lena looked into his eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, she didn't see a man she loved. She didn't see a man she feared. She saw a man who had hollowed her out and filled the empty space with his own rage, and she was suffocating under the weight of it. She pulled her arm free with a sharp, sudden twist. Derek grabbed for her again, but she was already stepping backward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Don't you dare walk away from me," he hissed. But she was walking. One step, then another, each one carrying her farther from the gravitational pull of his anger. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have a destination. She was running on pure adrenaline and a desperation so deep it felt like drowning in reverse. And then she saw Victor Salvatore. He was watching her, not with curiosity, not with concern, but with the kind of steady, unflinching attention that predators give to movement in their territory. His dark eyes tracked her as she moved through the crowd, and when she changed direction, heading straight for him, something shifted in his expression. A slight narrowing of his eyes, a barely perceptible tilt of his head. Lena's mind was screaming at her. "What are you doing? This is insane! This man could be more dangerous than Derek in every way that mattered." But her body kept moving, driven by an instinct older than reason, the instinct that says when the fire is behind you, you run toward the river, even if you can't see what's waiting on the other side. She stopped directly in front of Victor Salvatore. His 2 bodyguards shifted their hands, moving inside their jackets, but Victor raised one finger, barely a movement, and they went still. Up close, he was taller than she expected. His eyes were a deep brown, almost black, and they held a kind of intelligence that was both sharp and patient. He looked at her the way a chess player looks at an unexpected move, not alarmed, just recalculating. "Can I help you?" His voice was low, unhurried, laced with an accent she couldn't quite place. Lena's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. Her mouth was dry, her hands were trembling, and she could feel Derek's eyes burning into the back of her skull from across the room. She had about 5 seconds before he closed the distance and dragged her away, and she knew with bone-deep certainty that if he got his hands on her again tonight, something terrible would happen. So she did the only thing she could think of. She stepped forward, placed both hands on Victor Salvatore's chest, rose up on her toes, and kissed him. The ballroom went silent, not gradually, not in waves, but all at once, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. 200 people stopped talking, stopped drinking, stopped breathing. Victor went rigid. For one terrifying heartbeat, Lena thought he would push her away, that she had miscalculated fatally, that she had just signed her own death warrant in a different way. But then something changed. His hand came up and settled on the small of her back, not roughly like Derek, but firmly with a possessiveness that was entirely different. His other hand found her jaw, tilting her face upward, and he kissed her back. Not gently, not politely. He kissed her the way a man kisses a woman he's been waiting for, with heat and certainty and a promise that tasted like whiskey and smoke. When he finally pulled back, his thumb traced the line of her jaw, and he looked at her with those dark, calculating eyes. "That was unexpected," he said quietly. "I need help," Lena whispered. "The man behind me, the one coming toward us right now, he's going to hurt me. He's been hurting me for 2 years, and tonight I think he might kill me." Victor's eyes lifted over her shoulder, and whatever he saw made his expression harden into something that Lena could only describe as controlled fury. She heard Derek's voice behind her, loud and outraged. "Get your hands off my girlfriend!" Victor didn't move. He didn't flinch. He kept one hand on Lena's back and looked at Derek with the calm, dismissive gaze of a man who had never been afraid of anything in his life. "Your girlfriend," Victor repeated, as if the words were mildly amusing. "You heard me." Derek was vibrating with rage, his face purple, his fists clenched. "Lena, get over here. Now!" Victor's hand pressed gently against Lena's back, keeping her in place. "She doesn't seem interested in going with you." "I don't give a damn what she seems like. She belongs to me." A murmur rippled through the nearby crowd. People were watching now, openly and without pretense. Some of them recognized Victor. Lena could see it in the way they stepped back, creating a wider circle, as if proximity itself might be dangerous. Victor took a slow sip of his whiskey, never breaking eye contact with Derek. "I'm going to say this once," he said, and his voice dropped to a register that made the temperature in the room feel like it had fallen 10 degrees. "You don't own her. You never did. And if you take one more step toward her, you and I are going to have a conversation that you will not enjoy." Derek's bravado flickered. Lena saw it happen, the brief flash of uncertainty in his eyes, the slight backward lean of his body. Derek was a bully, and bullies operated on a simple calculation. They chose targets who couldn't fight back. Victor Salvatore was not that kind of target, but Derek's pride was louder than his survival instinct. "Do you know who I am?" Derek said, puffing his chest. "I'm Derek Haynes, Haynes Development Group. I have connections in this city that—" "I know exactly who you are," Victor said, cutting him off with surgical precision. "You're a man who puts his hands on a woman and calls it love. I've met 1,000 men like you, and not one of them was worth the air he breathed." Derek's face twisted. He took a step forward, reaching for Lena's wrist. "I said she's coming with—" Victor moved. It wasn't fast exactly. It was efficient. One moment he was standing still, and the next his hand was wrapped around Derek's wrist, bending it at an angle that made Derek gasp and drop to one knee. "I warned you," Victor said. His voice hadn't changed. His expression hadn't changed. He looked like a man discussing the weather while holding another man's bones in a grip that could snap them like twigs. "Let go of me," Derek wheezed. "I'll call the police. I'll have you arrested." "Go ahead." Victor released Derek's wrist and stepped back, placing himself between Lena and her abuser with the casual ease of a man moving a piece on a board. "Call them. Tell them everything. Tell them about the bruises on her arm. Tell them about the marks she covers with concealer every morning. I'm sure they'll be very interested." Derek scrambled to his feet, cradling his wrist. His eyes darted around the room, looking for allies, for support, for anyone who might take his side. But the crowd was silent, watching with the rapt attention of people who had just realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. "This isn't over," Derek said, pointing a shaking finger at Victor. "For you it is." Victor reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card, holding it out between two fingers. "My attorney's information. If you contact her, call her, or come within 100 yards of her from this moment forward, you will hear from me. And I assure you, Mr. Haynes, you do not want to hear from me." Derek stared at the card, then at Victor, then at Lena. His face cycled through rage, humiliation, and something that might have been fear. Then he turned and walked away, shoving through the crowd with the desperate energy of a man whose entire world had just been upended. Lena watched him go. She watched his back disappear through the ballroom doors, and she waited for the relief to come, the flood of liberation she had imagined so many times. But what she felt instead was terror, pure, crystalline terror, because Derek was gone, but she was still standing next to a man whose name made people cross the street. Victor turned to her. His expression softened slightly, though soft was a relative term on a face that seemed designed for intimidation. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Lena opened her mouth to give her standard response, the automatic, "I'm fine," that she had deployed 1,000 times to deflect concern. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, to her absolute horror, her eyes filled with tears, and her body began to shake with the kind of trembling that comes after the danger has passed, and the adrenaline has nowhere left to go. "I don't even know your name," she managed, her voice cracking. "Victor." He said it simply without ceremony. "Victor Salvatore." "I know who you are," she whispered. "I know what people say about you. And yet you kissed me anyway." There was the faintest ghost of something that might have been amusement in his eyes. "That either makes you very brave or very desperate." "Both," Lena said. "Definitely both." Victor studied her for a long moment, his gaze traveling over her face with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and strangely seen. Not the way Derek looked at her, cataloging flaws and opportunities for control. This was different. This was a man taking measure of another person and finding them worthy of attention. "You need to sit down," he said. "Marco, get her water." One of the bodyguards materialized with a glass of water so quickly that Lena wondered if he carried one at all times. Victor guided her toward a quiet corner of the ballroom, his hand on her back, light but certain. He pulled out a chair for her, and she sat down with the boneless relief of someone who had been carrying a weight far too heavy for far too long. "He'll come back," Lena said, wrapping her fingers around the glass. "You don't know him. He doesn't let go. He'll wait until you're gone, and then he'll come for me." Victor sat down across from her and leaned back in his chair completely at ease. "He won't. You don't understand. He knows where I live. He has keys to my apartment. He monitors my phone, my email, everything. I've tried to leave before, 4 times. He always finds me." Victor's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, barely visible, but it told Lena everything she needed to know about what he thought of men who cage women. "Where do you live?" he asked. "Lincoln Park. But I can't go back there tonight. Not after this." "Then you won't." He said it the way someone might say, "The sky is blue." A simple fact already decided. "I have a property on Lakeshore Drive. You'll stay there tonight. My security team will make sure you're safe." Lena stared at him. "I just kissed a stranger in the middle of a charity gala to escape my abusive boyfriend, and now that stranger is offering me a penthouse on Lakeshore Drive. Do you see how insane that sounds?" For the first time, Victor smiled. It was brief and guarded, as if he wasn't entirely used to the expression, but it transformed his face in a way that made Lena's breath catch. "I've heard crazier," he said. "I can't accept that. I don't even know you. For all I know, you're worse than him." Victor leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You're right. You don't know me. And the things people say about me are not entirely wrong. But I will tell you this, and you can decide for yourself whether to believe it. I have never in my life raised a hand to a woman. I have never used fear to control someone I claim to care about. And I have never turned away from someone who asked me for help." Lena searched his eyes for the lie, for the manipulation, for the false sincerity she had become an expert at detecting. She found none. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You don't know anything about me. You walked across a room full of people who were too afraid to look me in the eye, and you kissed me because you would rather take your chances with the most dangerous man in Chicago than spend one more minute with the man who was supposed to love you." Victor's voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. "That tells me everything I need to know about you." Lena felt the tears spill over again, hot and silent, tracking down her cheeks. She wiped them away with the back of her hand, embarrassed and overwhelmed. "I don't have anything," she said. "No money, no car, no family that will stand up to him. I have a nursing degree and $400 in a secret bank account. That's my entire life." Victor reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He typed something, waited, then put it back. "I just texted my driver. He'll be at the side entrance in 5 minutes. He'll take you to the apartment. The fridge is stocked, there's a security system, and 2 of my men will be outside the door all night. And you... I have business here tonight, but I'll check on you in the morning." He paused, then added, as if it were an afterthought, "If that's acceptable to you." Lena almost laughed. Almost. The contrast between Derek's commands and Victor's careful deference was so stark that it felt like stepping out of a dark room into sunlight. "It's acceptable," she said. Victor stood and offered her his hand. She took it, and the warmth of his palm against hers sent a jolt through her that she wasn't prepared for. Not attraction, not exactly. Recognition. The recognition that for the first time in 2 years, she was being touched by someone who wasn't trying to break her. He walked her to the side entrance himself, his bodyguards falling into step behind them. The car was already there, a black sedan with tinted windows and a driver who nodded at Victor with military precision. Victor opened the door for her, then paused. "One more thing. Tomorrow I'll have my attorney send a restraining order to Mr. Haynes. It will be filed by noon, but I want you to understand something." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. A piece of paper won't stop a man like him. What stops a man like him is knowing that the consequences of his actions will be swift, certain, and permanent. As long as I'm standing, you don't have to worry about consequences. That's my job now. Lena stood in the open car door, looking at this man she had known for less than 20 minutes, a man whose name was whispered in courtrooms and police stations and the back rooms of restaurants where deals were made in blood. And she felt something she hadn't felt in so long that she barely recognized it. Safe. She felt safe. "Thank you," she said, and meant it more than she had ever meant anything in her life. Victor nodded once. "Get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." She got into the car, and the door closed with a solid, heavy click. As the sedan pulled away from the hotel, Lena pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window and watched the lights of Chicago blur past. Somewhere in this city, Derek was nursing his humiliation and planning his revenge. Somewhere her mother was sleeping peacefully, unaware that her daughter had just kissed a Mafia boss in a ballroom full of strangers. Somewhere her old life was crumbling into pieces too small to put back together. The sedan came to a stop and the driver opened Lena's door without a word. She stepped out on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else and stared up at the building in front of her. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. Then again. Then again. She didn't need to look to know it was Derek. She could feel his rage radiating through the screen like heat from an open flame. She looked anyway. 17 missed calls, 9 text messages. The first one read, "You have 10 minutes to get back here." The last one read, "I will destroy everything you love." Lena's thumb hovered over the screen. Every instinct built by 2 years of conditioning screamed at her to call him back, to apologize, to beg. Her finger trembled. Then she pressed the power button and watched the screen go black. The apartment was on the 42nd floor. One of Victor's men, a broad-shouldered man, who introduced himself simply as Nico, rode the elevator with her and walked her to the door. He handed her a key card and a slip of paper with a phone number on it. "That's my direct line," he said. "Anything you need, any hour you call. Mr. Salvatore's instructions." "Does he do this often?" Lena asked. "Take in stray women from charity galas." Nico's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes that might have been respect. "No, ma'am, he doesn't." The door closed behind her, and Lena stood alone in Victor Salvatore's apartment. She kicked off her heels and walked to the window. The city spread out beneath her like a circuit board, all light and geometry and humming energy. She pressed her palm against the glass and felt the cold seep into her skin. She didn't sleep. She sat on the couch in her borrowed dress and stared at the ceiling until the sky turned gray, then pink, then gold. Her mind cycled through the same questions on a relentless loop. What had she done? Where would she go? What happened when Victor's generosity ran out and she was alone again with nothing but $400 and a mountain of fear? At 7:15 in the morning, there was a knock at the door. Lena's heart seized. She approached on bare feet and looked through the peephole, half expecting to see Derek's contorted face. Instead, she saw a woman in a sharp gray suit carrying a leather briefcase. Lena opened the door. "Lena Marlowe." The woman extended her hand. "I'm Diane Castellano. I'm Mr. Salvatore's attorney. May I come in?" "Isan." Lena stepped aside and Diane walked in with the brisk efficiency of someone who charged by the minute. She set her briefcase on the kitchen counter and pulled out a folder. "I've already drafted the restraining order against Derek Haynes," Diane said, opening the folder and spreading documents across the counter. "I need you to review it and sign. We're filing at 9 o'clock sharp. Lena stared at the papers. It's 7 in the morning. When did you draft this? 3 a.m. Mr. Salvatore called me at midnight. Diane said it as if midnight calls from Mafia bosses were a normal part of her practice, which Lena supposed they probably were. Does he always move this fast? Diane looked up from the papers, and for the first time her professional mask slipped enough to reveal something genuine. When something matters to him, he moves faster than anyone I've ever known. And whatever happened last night, you matter to him. I'd suggest you don't waste that. Lena signed the papers with a hand that shook only slightly. Diane gathered the documents and snapped her briefcase shut. One more thing. Mr. Salvatore asked me to arrange for your belongings to be collected from your apartment in Lincoln Park. I'll need your address and a list of what you want removed. We'll have a team there by this afternoon. A team. Movers, with a security escort. Mr. Haynes will not be present. We'll make sure of that. Lena gave her the address and a list that was painfully short. Some clothes, a box of photographs, her nursing diploma, a necklace her grandmother had given her before she died. That was everything. 2 years of her life and everything she valued could fit in the back of a single car. After Diane left, Lena took a shower that lasted 45 minutes. She stood under the water until it ran cold, then kept standing there, letting the chill strip away the layers of numbness she had wrapped around herself like armor. When she finally stepped out, she caught her reflection in the mirror and froze. The bruises on her arm were a deep, ugly purple, 5 distinct oval marks arranged in the shape of a hand. She had seen them before dozens of times, but she had always looked away quickly, minimized them, covered them up. This time she made herself look. She traced each mark with her finger and let the reality of what had been done to her settle into her bones without flinching. She was still standing there when her phone rang. She had turned it back on to call Cassie, and the screen showed an unfamiliar number. "Hello? It's Victor." His voice hit her like a physical thing, low and certain, cutting through the fog in her head. "How are you? Honest answer or polite answer? I don't waste time with polite answers. I feel like I jumped out of a burning building and I'm still falling and I don't know if there's anything to land on." There was a pause. When Victor spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less certain. "There is. You just can't see it yet." Lena closed her eyes. "Your attorney was here. She had papers drafted at 3 in the morning. Diane is very efficient. She said I matter to you. Is that true?" Another pause, longer this time. "I don't make a habit of explaining myself, Lena, but I'll tell you this. When you walked across that ballroom last night, you weren't looking for a hero. You were looking for a door. I happened to be standing next to one. That doesn't make me noble. It makes me observant." "That's a very careful answer." "I'm a very careful man." Lena almost smiled. "When will I see you?" "Tonight. I'll send a car at 7. We need to talk about what happens next." "What happens next? That's what we need to talk about." She could hear the faintest trace of warmth in his voice, so subtle that if she hadn't been listening for it, she would have missed it entirely. "Get some rest. Eat something. And Lena, yes. Don't answer any calls from numbers you don't recognize, except mine." The line went dead, and Lena realized she was holding the phone against her chest like a talisman. She spent the rest of the day doing things she hadn't done in 2 years. She called Cassie and talked for an hour without monitoring her own words for things Derek might object to. She made coffee and drank it slowly, without watching the clock, without dreading the sound of the front door. She sat by the window and let herself think about the future. Not with hope exactly, but with something adjacent to it. Curiosity, maybe. The faint, fragile sense that tomorrow might be different from yesterday. At 4 o'clock, her phone rang again. This time it was a number she recognized. Derek. Lena stared at the screen. Her finger hovered over the decline button, but something pulled at her, that old gravitational force, the one that whispered, "You owe him an explanation, you can't just disappear." What if he's sorry? She hated that voice. She hated that it still had power over her. But she answered the call anyway, because she needed to hear herself say the words out loud to someone, to him. "Lena." Derek's voice was thick with something she couldn't identify. Not rage, not yet. Something more calculated. "Baby, we need to talk." "We don't. What you did last night was crazy. You know that, right? Kissing some stranger in front of everyone? People are talking, Lena. They're saying things about you. Good. What? Genuine confusion. Derek couldn't process defiance. It didn't fit his model of the world. I said good, let them talk. I don't care anymore. You don't mean that. You're upset you're not thinking clearly. Just come home. We'll figure this out. I forgive you. The audacity of that word forgive hit Lena like a slap. You forgive me. You forgive me for what? For finally refusing to let you use me as a punching bag. I never punched you. His voice turned cold, the familiar prelude to the shift. Don't be dramatic. You're right. You never punched me. You grabbed, you squeezed, you shoved, you slammed. You bruised me in places no one could see and told me it was my fault for making you angry. You isolated me from my friends, you took my career, you controlled my money, and you convinced me that I deserved it. That's not love, Derek. That's a prison. Silence on the other end, then low and dangerous. Who's been filling your head with this garbage? That man from last night, the criminal. You think he's better than me? You think a guy like that is going to treat you with respect? He hasn't put a single bruise on me in the 12 hours I've known him. That's already better than you. You ungrateful little... Derek caught himself. She could hear him breathing, recalibrating, pulling the mask back on. When he spoke again, his voice was smooth and wounded. I love you, Lena. I've always loved you. Everything I've done was because I was afraid of losing you. Can't you see that? I see it perfectly. That's the problem. If you don't come home tonight, we're done. I mean it. There's no coming back from this. Lena let the words hang in the air. 2 months ago, that threat would have sent her spiraling. The idea of being alone, of being without the structure of Derek's control, had been more terrifying than the control itself. But something had shifted, cracked open, and she could feel fresh air rushing in. Then we're done, she said. She hung up and set the phone on the counter. Her hands were shaking violently, and her breath was coming in short, ragged gasps. She gripped the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white and forced herself to breathe. In, out, in, out. She had just ended a 2-year relationship in a 3-minute phone call, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. At 7 o'clock, a car arrived. Nico was driving. He took her to a restaurant in the West Loop that she had only ever seen in magazine spreads. Victor was already seated at a corner table, his jacket off his sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms that told the story of a man who had done more with his hands than shake them at dinner parties. 2 bodyguards sat at a separate table nearby, close enough to respond, far enough to grant privacy. Victor stood when she approached, and something in his expression shifted when he saw her face. She was wearing clothes that Diane had sent over that afternoon, simple but expensive, and she had done her best with her hair and makeup. But the exhaustion was there, written in the shadows under her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. You look like you haven't slept, he said. I haven't. He pulled out her chair and waited for her to sit before returning to his own seat. Did he call you? Yes. And I told him we're done. For real this time, not the kind of done where I go back 3 days later because he shows up with flowers and apologies. The permanent kind. Victor studied her across the table. How do you feel? Terrified. Free. Both at the same time. Is that possible? That's exactly what freedom feels like when you've been without it for too long. A waiter appeared and poured wine without being asked. Lena took a sip and felt the warmth spread through her chest. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Ask? What do you want from me? Victor leaned back in his chair. What do you think I want? I think a man in your position doesn't help a stranger for free. I think everything has a price, and I'd rather know what it is now than find out later. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that Lena began to regret asking. Then he said, You're right. Nothing is free. But you're wrong about what I want. He leaned forward, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. I want you to get your nursing license reinstated. I want you to rebuild the life that man took from you. I want you to become the person you were before he broke you down. Lena blinked. That's it. That's everything. And you expect nothing in return. I expect you to eat dinner with me tonight without looking over your shoulder. Start there. Lena felt something crack inside her chest. Not the sharp, painful crack of last night, but something softer, something opening instead of breaking. They ate dinner. They talked. Not about Derek, not about danger, not about the impossible situation she had landed in. Victor asked her about nursing, and she found herself describing the work she had loved: the night shifts at the ER, the adrenaline of trauma cases, the quiet satisfaction of watching a patient walk out healthy. He listened with the same focused attention he gave to everything, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested, not performing interest the way Derek always had. "Why did you stop?" he asked. "Derek wanted me home. He said nursing was beneath me, that I didn't need to work. But the truth was, he couldn't control me when I was at the hospital. He couldn't monitor who I talked to, where I went, what I did. So he convinced me to quit, and I told myself it was romantic that he wanted me around all the time." She shook her head. "I was so stupid." "You weren't stupid. You were being manipulated by someone who studied you the way a locksmith studies a lock. That's not a character flaw. That's a crime." Lena looked at him and felt something reckless and undeniable stirring in her chest. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Honestly, I expected Tony Montana with better tailoring." Victor laughed. It was a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, and it transformed his face so completely that Lena felt her heart stumble. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It wasn't one. I know. That's why I like it." They were interrupted by Nico, who approached the table and leaned down to Victor's ear. Lena watched Victor's expression change, the warmth draining away, replaced by the cold, hard mask she had first seen at the gala. He nodded once and Nico stepped back. "What is it?" Lena asked. Victor's jaw tightened. "Derek filed a police report. He's claiming you stole jewelry from his apartment and that I assaulted him at the gala." Lena's blood turned to ice. "I didn't steal anything. I've never taken anything from him." "I know, and the assault charge won't stick. There are 200 witnesses who saw him grab you and security cameras in the hotel corridor, but he's trying to create a paper trail. If he can establish that you're a thief and I'm violent, he can petition to have the restraining order thrown out." "He planned this." Lena's voice was hollow. "He's not just angry, he's strategic." "He's predictable," Victor said. "Every man like him plays the same game. He tries to control the narrative so that when people look at the situation, they see what he wants them to see: a wronged man, a crazy woman, a dangerous criminal." Victor reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "We're not going to let that happen." "How?" "Diana's already on it. We'll file countercharges for domestic abuse. We have medical evidence, we have witnesses, and we have his own text messages. By the time she's done, the only paper trail that matters will be the one that leads directly to him." Lena looked down at his hand on hers. His fingers were warm and steady, and she realized with a jolt of surprise that she didn't want him to let go. "I keep waiting for the catch," she said quietly. "Maybe there isn't one. There's always a catch." Victor squeezed her hand gently. "Then keep waiting. And while you're waiting, let me drive you home." They rode back to the apartment in comfortable silence. Nico drove the bodyguards, followed in a second car, and Lena sat beside Victor in the back seat, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She could smell his cologne, something dark and woodsy that made her think of forests and firelight. At the apartment door, Victor stopped. "Diane will have the countercharges filed by morning. In the meantime, don't respond to anything from Derek. No calls, no texts, no emails. Everything goes through my legal team from now on." "Okay." "And Lena." "Yes." He looked at her with those dark, unfathomable eyes, and she saw something there that she hadn't expected. Not desire, though, that was there too, simmering beneath the surface. What she saw was decision. A man who had made up his mind about something and would not be moved. "I meant what I said at the gala. As long as I'm standing, you don't have to be afraid." That wasn't a line, that was a promise. Lena nodded, unable to trust her voice. She watched him walk back toward the elevator, his bodyguards falling into step behind him, and she stood in the doorway long after the elevator doors closed, pressing her hand against the place on her wrist where his fingers had been. Inside the apartment, she sank onto the couch and pulled a blanket around her shoulders. The city glittered below, indifferent to her crisis, endlessly alive. Her phone sat on the counter silent for the first time in hours. Derek's threats hung in the air like smoke, but for the first time, they felt less like prophecies and more like the last desperate moves of a man who was losing a game he had rigged from the start. Lena pressed her palm against her stomach and felt something stir. Not a kick, Not yet. It was too early for that. But a presence. A tiny, insistent reminder that she was no longer making decisions for one. She hadn't told Victor yet. She hadn't told anyone. The pregnancy test she had taken 3 days ago was hidden inside a book in Derek's apartment, tucked between the pages of a novel he would never read. She had been too afraid to say it out loud, too afraid that Derek would use it as another chain, another lock on the cage he had built around her. But the child growing inside her was the reason she had found the courage to walk across that ballroom. Not for herself. For the tiny life that deserved better than a mother who flinched at footsteps and a father who turned love into a weapon. She would tell Victor. Soon. But not tonight. Tonight, she needed to sit in the silence and listen to the sound of her own breathing steady and unafraid, and believe even if only for a few hours that the worst was behind her. 3 days had passed since Lena Marlowe walked across a ballroom and kissed a stranger, and in those 3 days the world she had known had been dismantled piece by piece. Diane Castellano had filed the restraining order, the countercharges for domestic abuse, and a civil suit against Derek Haynes that read like a catalog of horrors. Derek's attorney had responded with a flurry of motions and counterclaims, each one more desperate than the last. But Diane handled them the way a surgeon handles a scalpel, with precision, patience, and zero emotion. Lena was sitting at the kitchen counter of the Lakeshore Drive apartment, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago when her phone buzzed. It was Cassie. "Have you seen the news?" Cassie's voice was pitched high with urgency. "What news?" "Derek went on Channel 7 this morning. He did a whole interview, crying the works. He's telling everyone you had a mental breakdown at the gala and that Victor Salvatore kidnapped you. He's playing the heartbroken boyfriend card, Lena, and people are buying it." Lena's stomach dropped. She grabbed the remote and turned on the television, flipping through channels until she found the replay. There was Derek sitting across from a sympathetic anchor, his eyes red-rimmed and his voice breaking at carefully rehearsed intervals. "I just want her to come home," he was saying, pressing a tissue to his eyes. "She's not well. She needs help, not some criminal taking advantage of her vulnerability." Lena watched her own name scroll across the bottom of the screen, and something cold and sharp lodged itself between her ribs. Derek had weaponized the media. He had turned their private nightmare into a public performance, and he had cast himself as the victim. "Lena, are you still there?" "I'm here." Her voice sounded far away, even to her own ears. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I'm not going back to him. I don't care what he tells the cameras." She hung up and called Victor. He answered on the first ring. "I saw it," he said before she could speak. "He's lying. Everything he said on that interview is a lie." "I know. People are going to believe him. He looked so convincing, Victor. He was crying. He never cries. He manufactured tears on national television, and everyone is going to think I'm some unstable woman who ran off with a gangster." "Lena, listen to me." Victor's voice was steady, an anchor in the storm. "He made a mistake. Going public means everything is now on the record. Every claim he made can be verified or disproven. And every lie he told on camera is a lie he told under the implied oath of public statement. Diane is already pulling the footage. By this afternoon, we'll have a timeline of contradictions that will make his attorney wish he'd kept his client off television. But the damage is done. People saw it. They believe him. People believe what they see last, and what they're going to see last is the truth." Lena pressed her forehead against the cool granite of the counter. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you 3 days ago." Silence on the other end. Patient waiting. "I'm pregnant." The silence stretched. 1 second. 2. 3. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs, and she braced for the shift, the withdrawal, the sudden recalculation that would change everything. "How far along?" Victor's voice hadn't changed. Not a single degree of warmth, lost not a single note of panic. "About 8 weeks. I found out 3 days before the gala. Derek doesn't know. No one knows." "Is it his—" The question stung, but she understood why he had to ask it. "Yes." Another pause. Then, "Does that change anything for you about leaving him?" "It's the reason I left him. I spent 2 years letting him break me because I thought I could survive it. But I won't let him break my child. I won't let my baby grow up watching their mother flinch every time a door slams." Victor was quiet for so long that Lena pulled the phone away from her ear to check if the call was still connected. It was. "Victor, I'm here. I'm thinking." "About what?" "About the fact that you just told me you're carrying another man's child, and the only thing I feel is a stronger need to protect you." Lena's breath caught. She pressed her hand against her mouth and felt hot tears slide between her fingers. She had spent 3 days bracing for the moment when Victor's generosity would reach its limit, when the cost of helping her would outweigh whatever impulse had driven him to intervene. And instead, he had just moved the boundary further than she had dared to imagine. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "This isn't your responsibility." "No, it's my choice. There's a difference." He told her he would be at the apartment by noon and that Diane would be joining them to discuss strategy in light of Derek's media stunt. Then he hung up, and Lena sat in the silence and tried to process the fact that a man she had known for 72 hours had just accepted her pregnancy with more grace and steadiness than the man who had created it would have shown in a lifetime. Victor arrived at noon with Diane Nico and a second man Lena hadn't seen before, a lean, sharp-eyed man in his 50s, who carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had been solving problems for a very long time. "This is Sal Ferraro," Victor said. "He handles my security operations. Given what Derek did this morning, I want him involved." Sal nodded at Lena with a respect that felt genuine. "Ma'am, I've already begun a full assessment of Mr. Haynes's patterns, financial records, and known associates. I want you to know that you're not dealing with this alone." Diane spread a stack of documents across the kitchen counter. "Here's where we stand. Derek's interview created a media narrative, but it also created legal exposure. He made 3 specific claims on camera. 1, that Lena had a mental breakdown. 2, that Victor kidnapped her. 3, that Lena is mentally unfit. Each of those claims is defamatory, and each one can be disproven with evidence we already have." "How?" Lena asked. "The mental breakdown claim falls apart the moment we produce the hospital records from his previous assaults. You went to the ER twice in the last year, correct?" Lena nodded, shame burning in her cheeks. "Once for a sprained wrist, once for bruised ribs. I told them I fell." "The intake photos tell a different story. The bruise patterns are consistent with grabbing and shoving, not falling. Any forensic expert will confirm that in 5 minutes." Diane's voice was clinical, but her eyes held a warmth that softened the blow. "The kidnapping claim is demolished by the hotel's security footage, which shows you walking to Victor of your own free will, and by the testimony of 200 gala attendees. And the mental fitness claim is laughable, given that you're a licensed nurse with no history of psychiatric treatment." "She won't need to respond publicly," Victor said. "Not yet. Let Derek keep talking. Every word he says on camera is evidence we can use in court." "There's one more thing," Diane said, and her tone shifted in a way that made Lena's stomach tighten. "Derek's attorney filed an emergency motion this morning to freeze your personal bank account. He's claiming the funds are marital property." "We're not married," Lena said. "We were never married." "He's claiming common law cohabitation and shared financial responsibility. It won't hold up, but it takes time to fight, and in the meantime, your account is frozen." Lena felt the room tilt. $412. That was everything she had, and now she couldn't even touch it. Derek had found a way to reach her without being in the same room, without making a single phone call, without violating the restraining order. He had reached into her life and closed his fist around the one thing she had kept hidden from him. "He knew about the account," Lena said, her voice flat. "I thought I was so careful. I opened it at a different bank, used a different email, but he found it." Victor turned to Sal. "How?" Sal's expression darkened. "There are services that specialize in tracking hidden accounts. For the right price, you can find anything. My guess is he hired a PI sometime in the last year, probably when he first suspected she was planning to leave." "He's been watching me." Lena's hands curled into fists on the counter. "He's been watching me this whole time, and I didn't even know." Victor's jaw tightened with controlled fury. "Diane, get the freeze lifted. Today. I don't care what it takes. It'll require an emergency hearing. I can get us in front of a judge by 3 o'clock if I push." "Then push." Diane gathered her documents and left with the focused energy of a woman who had never lost a case and didn't intend to start now. Sal followed already on his phone, speaking in low, rapid Italian. Nico took his position outside the door, and suddenly Lena and Victor were alone. The silence between them was heavy with everything that had just been said and everything that hadn't. Victor stood by the window with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the city with an expression that Lena couldn't read. "You're angry," she said. "Yes." "At me." He turned to look at her, and the sharpness in his eyes softened. "At myself. I should have anticipated the media play. A man like Derek doesn't just rage, he strategizes. I underestimated him, and that won't happen again." "This isn't your war, Victor. You didn't sign up for any of this." He crossed the room and stood in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head up to meet his eyes. "When you kissed me in that ballroom, you pulled the pin on a grenade that was going to go off one way or another. You just chose who would be standing next to you when it did. I'm standing here. I'm not leaving." "Why?" Her voice cracked on the word. "I keep asking you that, and you keep giving me answers that don't make sense. You're a powerful man. You have enemies, responsibilities, an empire to run. Why would you take on the mess of a pregnant woman running from an abuser?" Victor reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so gentle, so unexpectedly tender, that it undid something deep inside her. "Because 30 years ago my mother was you," he said quietly. "She was trapped with a man who used his fists to feel powerful, and no one helped her. No one stood between her and the man who was destroying her. She survived on her own, and she raised me on her own, and she is the strongest person I have ever known. But she shouldn't have had to do it alone. No one should." Lena's tears fell without sound, sliding down her cheeks and landing on her collarbone. She didn't wipe them away. She let them fall because they felt like the first honest thing she had done in years. "Your mother," she said. She's alive. She lives in Lake Forest. She's going to love you. Despite everything, despite the frozen bank account and the television lies and the weight of her entire world pressing down on her shoulders." Lena laughed. It was a small, broken sound, but it was real, and Victor's eyes warmed at the sight of it. "You're already planning for me to meet your mother. My mother would have planned it herself if I hadn't called her first." Lena shook her head. "This is insane. All of it. You know that, right? The sanest decisions I've ever made were the ones that looked insane to everyone else." Diane called at 4:15. The judge had ruled in their favor. The account freeze was lifted. But that wasn't the most important news. During the hearing, Derek's attorney made a tactical error. Diane said, her voice carrying the restrained satisfaction of a chess player who has just seen checkmate 3 moves away. He referenced text messages between Derek and Lena as evidence of their relationship. In doing so, he entered those messages into the record, which means we now have legal access to the full text history. "All of it?" Lena asked. "All of it, including the threats. Including the one where he wrote, and I'm quoting from the filing, 'If you don't come home, I will make sure no one can help you.' That message is now part of the court record. His own attorney put it there." Victor looked at Lena across the counter. "I told you. He's predictable." Lena sank onto a bar stool, her legs weak with relief. "What happens now?" "Now we go on offense," Diane said. "I'm scheduling a press conference for tomorrow morning. You don't have to be there if you don't want to. I can make the statement on your behalf, but it would be more powerful if you spoke for yourself." Lena felt the fear surge, hot and immediate. The idea of standing in front of cameras, of saying out loud what Derek had done to her, of letting the world see the woman behind the bruises, made her want to crawl under the covers and disappear. But beneath the fear, something else was stirring. Anger. Real, clarifying, righteous anger. "I'll do it," Lena said. "Are you sure?" Victor asked. "He went on television and called me crazy. He told the world that I was kidnapped. He's trying to rewrite our history so that he's the victim and I'm the villain. If I stay silent, his version becomes the truth. I won't let that happen. Not for me, and not for my child." Victor looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. It wasn't surprise exactly. It was something closer to recognition, the look of a man watching someone become who they were always meant to be. "Then we do it together," he said. That night they sat on the couch and went through the text messages that Diane had compiled. Lena read them aloud one by one, and with each message she felt another chain fall away. The threats, the manipulations, the gaslighting, the desperate controlling love that had masqueraded as devotion. Seeing them laid out in sequence, stripped of context and emotion, they read like the manual of an abuser, systematic, calculated, and devoid of genuine feeling. Listen to this one. Lena said, her voice steady now, almost clinical. June 14th. I only get angry because I love you so much. If you didn't push me, I wouldn't have to react. You know that. He sent that 2 hours after he threw a glass at my head. Victor's hands were perfectly still in his lap, but a muscle in his jaw twitched with barely contained rage. How many messages like that are there? Hundreds, maybe more. He texted me constantly. When I was at the grocery store, when I was at Cassie's, when I was in the shower. If I didn't respond within 5 minutes, the messages would escalate from worried to angry to threatening within half an hour. And you kept all of them. I didn't delete anything. I don't know why. Maybe part of me knew I would need them someday. Or maybe I was just too afraid to erase them, like deleting the evidence would somehow make it worse. Victor reached over and took the phone from her hands, setting it face down on the cushion between them. That's enough for tonight. I'm fine. You're shaking. She looked down at her hands and realized he was right. Her fingers were trembling against her thighs, a fine, rapid vibration that she hadn't even noticed. She clenched them into fists, then unclenched them, then pressed them flat against her knees. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't walked across that ballroom, she said. If I had just stayed next to him and smiled and gone home and let him do whatever he was going to do that night, I would still be there. I would still be pretending, and my baby would be growing inside a woman who had given up. But you didn't give up. You made a choice that terrified you, and you made it anyway. That's not desperation, Lena. That's courage. She looked at him, and in that moment the distance between them felt both vast and paper-thin. She could see the wall he kept around himself, the careful control, the measured responses, the way he held himself back from her, as if crossing a line he had drawn in his own mind. Victor. Yes. I kissed you 3 days ago because I was desperate. If I kissed you right now, it would be for a very different reason. His eyes darkened. She watched him struggle with something behind that controlled exterior, a war between discipline and desire that played out in the tightening of his shoulders and the slight forward lean of his body. Lena, you are in the middle of the most difficult period of your life. You are pregnant, you are being stalked by your ex, and you have known me for less than a week. If I kissed you right now, I would be the kind of man who takes advantage of vulnerability, and I refuse to be that man. And if I told you that you're wrong, that this isn't vulnerability, that for the first time in years I'm seeing clearly and what I see is you. Victor's hand found hers on the couch. He lifted it to his lips and pressed a single kiss against her knuckles, and the tenderness of it was more devastating than any passionate embrace could have been. Then I would say wait. Wait until the storm passes. Wait until you're standing on solid ground. And if you still feel this way when the dust settles, I'll be right here. Lena felt her heart crack open, not with pain, but with something luminous and overwhelming. This man, this feared and powerful man, was choosing restraint over desire, her well-being over his own wants, her future over the present moment. Derek had never once put her needs before his own. Not once. And Victor had been doing it since the first moment he caught her in his arms. "You're a better man than you think you are," she whispered. "Don't tell anyone. It would ruin my reputation." She laughed again, and this time it was fuller, warmer, closer to the sound she used to make before Derek had hammered the joy out of her voice. They sat together in the quiet of the apartment while the city hummed below them, and Lena let herself imagine something she hadn't allowed herself to imagine in years. A future. Not a perfect one, not a fairy tale with a guaranteed ending, but a real one built on the ruins of everything she had survived, held together by the stubborn, unlikely bond forming between a woman who had nothing and a man who had everything except the one thing he wanted most. Someone who saw him clearly and chose him anyway. At midnight, Victor stood to leave. At the door, he paused and turned back. "Tomorrow at the press conference, you're going to stand in front of cameras and tell the truth about what Derek did to you. It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, but I want you to remember something." "What?" "You already did the hardest thing. You walked away. Everything after that is just telling the world what you already know." He left, and Lena stood in the doorway, one hand pressed against her stomach, the other against the doorframe where his shoulder had leaned. Tomorrow she would face cameras. Tomorrow she would speak the unspeakable. Tomorrow Derek would watch from whatever hole he was hiding in and realize that the woman he had spent 2 years silencing had finally found her voice. Lena woke at 5 in the morning with her heart already racing. The press conference was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and the 5 hours between now and then stretched out like a minefield she would have to cross barefoot. She lay in bed with her hands on her stomach and felt the nausea roll through her in slow, relentless waves. Morning sickness or pure terror, probably both. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Diane. "Car picks you up at 8:30. Outfit options being delivered at 7. We'll prep you at the venue. You're going to be brilliant." Lena stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time someone had called her brilliant. Derek had called her plenty of things. Stupid, ungrateful, crazy, worthless. He had a vocabulary of destruction that he deployed with surgical accuracy, each word chosen to cut the deepest, to hollow out another piece of her self-worth. But brilliant had never been one of them. She got up, showered, and was drying her hair when Nico knocked on the door with 3 garment bags and a note in Victor's handwriting. The note read, "Wear whatever makes you feel like the strongest version of yourself. I'll be in the front row." Lena pressed the note against her chest and closed her eyes. Then she opened the garment bags and chose a navy blue dress with clean lines and a high neckline. Simple, professional. The kind of outfit that said, "Believe me," without saying anything at all. At 8:30, the car arrived. Nico drove, and Sal Ferraro sat in the passenger seat, scanning the streets with the vigilance of a man who expected trouble and intended to meet it head-on. "Any movement from Derek?" Lena asked. Sal glanced back at her. His attorney filed a motion to block the press conference. The judge denied it 20 minutes ago. Derek also tried to book a counter-press event at the same hotel. The hotel declined. My guess is he'll try to show up in person. "Let him," Lena said, and was surprised by the steel in her own voice. Sal's eyebrows rose slightly. "Yes, ma'am." The venue was a conference room at the Palmer House chosen by Diane for its prestige and its excellent security infrastructure. When Lena walked in, she found Diane already there arranging documents on a podium, flanked by 2 associates and a media consultant named Rachel, who spoke in rapid, clipped sentences. "Okay, here's how this works," Rachel said, guiding Lena to a chair. "You'll read a prepared statement, then take 3 questions, no more than 3. Diane will step in if anything gets adversarial. The key messages are simple. You were in an abusive relationship. You left of your own free will. Derek's claims are false. You have evidence to support everything." "And Victor," Rachel hesitated. "We acknowledge his assistance, but keep the focus on you. This is your story, not his. The moment it becomes about Victor Salvatore, the narrative shifts from domestic abuse survivor to mob girlfriend. We can't let that happen." Lena nodded, but something about the phrase mob girlfriend landed like a stone in her gut. She pushed it aside and focused on the papers in front of her. Diane sat down beside her. "I want to show you something before we go out there." She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward Lena. "This is the security footage from the hotel corridor the night of the gala." Lena watched herself on the screen, a small figure in a blue dress being shoved against a wall by a man twice her size. She watched Derek's hand slam next to her head. She watched her own body flinch, fold inward, shrink. The footage was silent, but she could hear every word in her memory, and each one hit like a closed fist. "This footage was obtained by subpoena this morning," Diane said. "I've sent copies to every major outlet in Chicago. By the time you step up to that podium, every newsroom in the city will have already seen what Derek Haynes does behind closed doors." Lena's eyes burned, but she blinked the tears back. "Good." At 9:45, Victor arrived. He walked into the prep room with Nico and Marco flanking him, and the energy in the room shifted the way it always did when he entered a space. Not with noise or dramatics, with gravity. He drew everything toward him simply by existing. He crossed to Lena and took her hands. "How are you?" "Terrified." "Good. Fear means you understand the weight of what you're doing. Comfortable people don't change the world." "I'm not trying to change the world. I'm trying to survive it." "Same thing." He squeezed her hands and released them. "I'll be right there. You won't be alone." At 10 o'clock, sharp Lena walked out to face 37 reporters, 14 cameras, and the accumulated curiosity of a city that had been watching her story unfold in real time. The room buzzed with whispered speculation that fell silent the moment she reached the podium. She looked out at the faces. Some were sympathetic, some were skeptical, some were already composing their narratives, fitting her into whatever story would generate the most clicks. She found Victor in the front row, seated with his arms crossed, his expression calm and watchful. He gave her the smallest nod. Lena gripped the edges of the podium and began. "My name is Lena Marlowe. 4 days ago, a man named Derek Haynes went on television and told you I was mentally unstable. He told you I was kidnapped. He told you I was a victim who needed to be saved from herself. I'm here today to tell you the truth." Her voice shook on the first sentence, steadied on the second, and by the third it was clear and strong. "For 2 years I was in a relationship with Derek Haynes. During that time he controlled where I went, who I spoke to, what I wore, and whether I worked. He isolated me from my friends and family. He monitored my phone and my email. He convinced me to give up my nursing career. And when I tried to assert any independence, any autonomy, any basic human right to exist as my own person, he responded with violence." She paused. The room was completely still. "I went to the emergency room twice. Once for a sprained wrist that he caused by twisting my arm behind my back during an argument about whether I could visit my mother. Once for bruised ribs that he caused by shoving me into a kitchen counter because dinner was late. Both times I told the doctors I fell. Both times the intake photographs told a different story. Those photographs are now part of the court record." A reporter in the second row shifted uncomfortably. A camera clicked, then another. "On the night of the Children's Hospital Charity Gala, Derek assaulted me in a hotel corridor. That assault was captured on the hotel security camera's footage that has been provided to you today. After that assault, I made the decision to leave. I walked across the ballroom and I asked for help from the only person in the room whose presence made Derek afraid. I was not kidnapped. I was not coerced. I was a woman who chose to escape a dangerous situation by any means available to her." Lena's hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped, replaced by a clarity she hadn't felt in years. "Mr. Haynes went on television and cried for the cameras. He called me crazy. He called me a thief. He filed false police reports and attempted to freeze my bank account. These are not the actions of a man who loves someone. These are the actions of a man who is losing control and will do anything to get it back. I am here to tell you that he has lost control, permanently." She looked directly into the center camera. "I am not crazy. I am not a victim. I am a survivor, and I will not be silenced by a man who confuses ownership with love." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions over each other. Cameras flashed in a blinding barrage, and Rachel stepped forward to manage the chaos. Lena took 3 questions. The first was about the security footage. The second was about the restraining order. The third, from a young reporter in the back row, made the room go quiet again. "Ms. Marlowe, what is your relationship with Victor Salvatore?" Lena looked at Victor. He sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were locked on hers with an intensity that made the air between them feel charged. "Victor Salvatore helped me when no one else would," she said carefully. "He provided me with safety when I had none. I am grateful for his support, and I will not apologize for accepting help from someone willing to give it. But are you and Mr. Salvatore romantically involved?" "This press conference is about domestic violence," Diane interjected smoothly, stepping to the podium. "We'll be happy to take additional questions on that topic. Thank you all for your time." The cameras kept rolling as Lena stepped away from the podium, but the questions faded behind her as she walked through the side door and into the hallway where Victor was already waiting. "You were extraordinary," he said. "I feel like I'm going to throw up." "That's also a sign of extraordinary performance." Lena leaned against the wall and pressed her palms against her eyes. "The last question. About us. They're going to run with that. Let them. Victor, this could hurt you. Your reputation, your business, everything. If people start digging into your life because of me. My life has been dug into by the FBI, the IRS, 2 congressional committees, and every investigative journalist in the Midwest. A few gossip columnists don't concern me. But I concern you." He looked at her, and the mask slipped just enough for her to see what was beneath it. "Yes, you do." Before she could respond, Nico appeared at the end of the hallway, moving fast. "Boss, we have a problem." Victor's expression hardened instantly. "What?" "Derek Haynes is in the lobby. He bypassed security through the service entrance. He's demanding to see Lena, and he's not alone. He brought his brother." Lena's blood went cold. Derek's brother Ryan was 6'4" and had a temper that made Derek look like a choir boy. She had seen Ryan put a man in the hospital over a parking space. The idea of him standing 20 floors below her, vibrating with the Haynes family rage, made her knees buckle. "How many of our people are downstairs?" Victor asked. "4, plus hotel security. That's enough. Keep them in the lobby. I'm going down." "No." Lena grabbed his arm. "Victor, don't. That's exactly what he wants. He wants a confrontation. He wants you to do something that proves what he's been saying about you." Victor stopped. His jaw worked silently, the war between action and strategy playing out across his face. Then he turned to Nico. "She's right. Keep them contained, but don't engage. Call Diane. Tell her to get hotel management to have them removed for trespassing. I want it on camera. And if they resist, then hotel security handles it. Our people don't touch them. Not a finger. Understood?" Nico nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Victor turned back to Lena. "We leave through the loading dock. Marco has the car waiting." They moved fast, Victor's hand on her back, guiding her through service corridors and freight elevators with the efficiency of a man who had made quick exits before. Lena's heart pounded as they descended each floor, bringing them closer to the lobby where Derek was raging. On the 3rd floor, her phone rang. Derek's number. "Don't answer it," Victor said. "I have to." She picked up before he could argue. "What do you want, Derek?" "I watched your little performance." Derek's voice was shaking with barely contained fury. "You stood up there and lied in front of the whole city. You made me look like a monster. You are a monster. I'm coming up there. Ryan's with me. You want to do this the hard way, Lena? Fine. We'll do it the hard way. You're going to get escorted out by hotel security in about 30 seconds, and every camera in that lobby is going to capture you being dragged out of a building after your victim just gave a press conference about domestic abuse. Think about that, Derek. Think about how that looks." Silence. Then a burst of profanity so violent that Lena pulled the phone away from her ear. Victor's eyes narrowed as he caught fragments of Derek's tirade. "We're done," Lena said into the phone. "Don't call me again." She hung up and realized her hands weren't shaking. Her voice hadn't cracked. She had spoken to Derek Haynes without flinching, without apologizing, without bending. And the world hadn't ended. Victor looked at her with something that went beyond admiration. "You didn't need me for that." "No, but I'm glad you were here." They reached the loading dock and climbed into the waiting car. As they pulled away from the hotel, Lena's phone buzzed with a text from Sal. Haynes and his brother removed by hotel security, both on camera, both screaming, both looking exactly like what they are. Victor read the text over her shoulder and nodded once. "It's over." "It's not over. He'll keep coming." "Then we'll keep being ready." They drove in silence for several minutes before Lena spoke again. "I want to reinstate my nursing license." Victor turned to look at her. "When? Now, today, I want to call the Illinois Board of Nursing and start the reinstatement process. I want to go back to work. I want to rebuild my life, and I want to start immediately." "Diane can expedite the paperwork." "No, I want to do it myself. Diane has done enough. You've done enough. This part needs to be mine." Victor studied her for a long moment, and then he smiled. That rare, unguarded smile that broke through his controlled exterior like sunlight through storm clouds. "Then do it." Lena made the call from the back seat of the car with Victor beside her and Chicago streaming past the windows. The woman at the Board of Nursing was helpful and efficient. Lena's license had lapsed but could be reinstated with a refresher course and a skills assessment. There was a program starting in 2 weeks. "I'll be there," Lena said, and when she hung up, she felt something shift inside her. Not the dramatic cracking shift of the gala night. Something quieter. Something that felt like foundation being laid solid and level and capable of holding weight. 2 weeks, she said to Victor. "That's all I need." You'll have it." They returned to the apartment, and Lena turned on the television to find her press conference leading every local news channel. The security footage played on a loop, Derek's silhouette shoving her against the wall, his hand slamming beside her head, her body folding with the practiced submission of a woman who had been hit before. Alongside it, the footage from the lobby, Derek red-faced and screaming as security guards escorted him and his brother out of the Palmer house. The contrast was devastating and undeniable. The anchors were careful with their words, but the narrative had shifted. Derek was no longer the heartbroken boyfriend. He was the abuser caught on camera, and Lena was no longer the crazy woman who had kissed a criminal. She was the survivor who had fought back. Lena watched for a few minutes, then turned the television off. She didn't need validation from strangers. She needed to eat to rest and to let her body do the quiet work of growing a life that deserved better than what had come before. Victor stayed for dinner. They ordered Thai food and ate it on the couch, and for the first time since the gala, the conversation had nothing to do with Derek or court filings or media strategy. Victor told her about growing up on the South Side, about his mother working double shifts at a laundromat while building a business from nothing, about the moment he realized that the world was divided into people who made rules and people who followed them, and that he had decided very early which side he wanted to be on. "Do you ever regret it?" Lena asked. "The life you chose." "Every life has costs. Mine are higher than most, but so are the returns. The question isn't whether you regret your choices. It's whether you'd make them again with everything you know now. And would you? Every single one, including the one I made 4 nights ago in a ballroom when a woman I'd never met decided I was worth the risk." Lena set down her fork and looked at him. "I told you I'd kiss you again when the storm passed. The storm hasn't passed. Maybe I don't want to wait for perfect conditions anymore. Maybe I've spent too much of my life waiting." Victor set his own food aside and turned to face her fully. His expression was stripped of its usual armor, raw and open in a way she hadn't seen before. "If we do this, it changes everything. Not just for you and me, for your child, for my world. You would be stepping into a life that has dangers you can't imagine. I've been living with danger for 2 years. At least yours comes with honesty." He reached for her, then slowly giving her every chance to pull away. His hand cupped her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone, and she leaned into his touch the way a plant leans toward light. "I'm going to kiss you now," he said. "Not because you're desperate, not because you're afraid, because I have wanted to since the moment you walked across that room and showed me what courage looks like." When his lips met hers, it was nothing like the kiss at the gala. That kiss had been survival. This one was choice. His mouth moved against hers with a tenderness that broke something open inside her chest, and she kissed him back with everything she had, every broken piece, every healing wound, every stubborn, defiant part of her that refused to be destroyed. When they pulled apart, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "I'm in this, Lena. All the way. Whatever comes." "Whatever comes," she repeated. He left at midnight the way he always did with Nico at his side, and the city sprawled beneath them like a promise. But this time, when the door closed, Lena didn't feel the absence. She felt the echo of his presence, warm and steady, filling the spaces that Derek had emptied. She stood at the window with her palm against her stomach and felt the baby stir. A flutter barely perceptible like butterfly wings against her fingertips. Her child was alive, growing, becoming, and so was she. Lena Marlowe had walked into a ballroom wearing a borrowed dress and carrying 2 years of bruises. She had walked out with the most dangerous man in Chicago at her side and the first breath of freedom in her lungs. She had stood before cameras and told the truth that had been rotting inside her. She had faced her abuser's rage and refused to bend, and now she was standing in her own apartment, in her own body, with her own child growing beneath her heart, and she was not afraid. Not of Derek, not of the cameras, not of the uncertain future stretching out before her. 2 weeks later, Lena Marlowe walked into Rush University Medical Center for her nursing refresher course and felt something she hadn't felt in so long that it took her a moment to name it. Purpose. Not the manufactured purpose of keeping Derek calm or managing his moods or anticipating his violence. Real purpose. The kind that comes from knowing you are exactly where you are supposed to be doing exactly what you were made to do. The instructor, a veteran ER nurse named Gloria Watts, looked at Lena's credentials and raised an eyebrow. You graduated top of your class at Loyola. You had a trauma specialization, and you've been out of practice for 2 years. Personal circumstances, Lena said. Gloria studied her for a beat too long, and Lena knew the older woman had seen the news coverage. Everyone had. The press conference had gone viral within hours. The security footage shared millions of times, Lena's face and name attached to a story that had become bigger than she ever intended. She braced for pity, for awkward sympathy, for the careful handling that people give to women they perceive as broken. Instead, Gloria nodded once and said, "Welcome back. Don't waste my time and I won't waste yours." Lena didn't waste her time. She threw herself into the coursework with a ferocity that surprised even herself. Her hands remembered what her mind had tried to forget, the precise angle of an IV insertion, the rhythm of CPR compressions, the calm authority required to stabilize a patient who was bleeding out on a gurney. She stayed late every day, practiced on simulation dummies until her shoulders ached, and passed her skills assessment on the first try with the highest score in her cohort. Gloria pulled her aside after the final exam. "I'm putting in a recommendation for you at Northwestern Memorial. They need trauma nurses, and frankly, you're better than most of the people already on staff." "Thank you," Lena said, and meant it down to her bones. "Don't thank me. Thank whoever gave you the push to come back." Lena thought of Victor and pressed her hand against the slight swell of her belly, now visible enough that she had started wearing loose scrubs. "I will." She called Victor from the parking lot. He answered the way he always did on the first ring, his voice low and warm. "I passed." "I know. Gloria called Diane 20 minutes ago. She said, and I quote, 'That girl is the best nurse I've trained in 15 years. Gloria called your attorney. I may have asked Diane to check in periodically. You had your lawyer spy on my nursing program. I prefer the term supportive oversight." Lena laughed so hard she had to lean against the car. When she caught her breath, she said, "I got a recommendation to Northwestern Memorial, trauma unit. When do you start?" "I have an interview next Monday. If it goes well, I could be back on the floor within a month." "It'll go well." "You sound very confident about that." "I'm confident about you. The rest is details." She drove back to the apartment that had slowly, imperceptibly become home. She had hung curtains. She had bought a plant. She had pinned her nursing diploma to the wall above her desk, the same diploma Derek had made her take down, because he said it made the living room look clinical. Small acts of ownership that accumulated into something larger. Evidence that she existed, that she had a past and a future and a present that belonged to no one but her. That evening, Victor took her to dinner at his mother's house in Lake Forest. Lena had been dreading this meeting for days, constructing scenarios in her head that ranged from cold disapproval to outright hostility. She was, after all, a pregnant woman with a violent ex-boyfriend who had attached herself to Victor under circumstances that could charitably be called unconventional. But Elena Salvatore opened the front door and pulled Lena into a hug so fierce and immediate that it knocked the prepared greeting right out of Lena's mouth. "I've been waiting to meet you," Elena said, holding Lena at arm's length and studying her face with dark eyes that were carbon copies of her son's. "Victor doesn't bring women to my home, not ever. The fact that you're here tells me everything I need to know." "Mrs. Salvatore, Elena, you call me Elena, and you sit down and eat because you're too thin and you're growing a baby, and in this house we feed people." Dinner was enormous, chaotic, and nothing like what Lena had expected. Elena talked with her hands and laughed with her entire body and told stories about Victor's childhood that made him pinch the bridge of his nose in barely concealed embarrassment. She talked about her own years of abuse with a directness that took Lena's breath away. No euphemisms, no softening, just the blunt, unflinching truth of a woman who had survived the worst and refused to be ashamed of it. "When I left Victor's father," Elena said, pouring more wine that Lena politely declined, "I had $40, a 4-year-old boy, and a black eye. No family in this country, no English, no nothing. You know what I had? What? I had fury. And fury, my dear, is the most underrated survival tool a woman can carry." Lena looked at Victor across the table. He was watching his mother with an expression of such deep, unguarded love that Lena felt her heart constrict. This was the man behind the reputation. This was who he was when the armor came off and the walls came down. "She's remarkable," Lena told him on the drive home. "She would say the same about you. She already did, in fact. She texted me from the kitchen while you were in the bathroom. 3 words. Keep this one. Subtle." Subtlety is not a Salvatore family trait. Lena's interview at Northwestern went exactly as Victor had predicted. The head of the trauma unit, Dr. James Okoro, reviewed her credentials, her assessment scores, and Gloria's recommendation, and offered her a position on the spot. She would start in 3 weeks pending a background check and medical clearance. "One more thing," Dr. Okoro said as she stood to leave. "I saw the press coverage. I want you to know that this hospital has a zero-tolerance policy for workplace harassment, and our security team is among the best in the city. You will be safe here." Lena shook his hand and managed to hold herself together until she reached the hallway. Then she pressed her back against the wall and cried, silent and shaking, overwhelmed by the simple, extraordinary kindness of a stranger who had looked at her and seen a nurse, not a headline. She started work on a Tuesday. The first shift was 12 hours, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and by midnight, she had already intubated a car accident. Victim stabilized a teenager with a gunshot wound and talked a panicking father through his daughter's asthma attack. The adrenaline was familiar, the exhaustion was welcome, and by the time she peeled off her scrubs at 7 in the morning, she felt more like herself than she had in years. Victor was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his car, with 2 cups of coffee and a look of quiet satisfaction. "You didn't have to wait," she said, taking the coffee. "I wanted to hear how it went." "It went like coming home." He drove her back to the apartment, and she fell asleep on the couch, with her head on his shoulder and his arm around her, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she slept without dreaming. The peace lasted 11 days. On a Wednesday morning, Lena was leaving the apartment for her shift when Nico intercepted her in the lobby. His face told her everything before his mouth did. "Derek posted bail 3 hours ago." Lena went still. "Bail for what?" "He was arrested last night for violating the restraining order. He showed up at your old apartment in Lincoln Park and tried to break in. The neighbors called the police. He was combative during the arrest, assaulted an officer, and was held overnight. His attorney got him out this morning." "He knows I don't live there anymore." "Yes, but the apartment is still listed as your legal address on the restraining order. By going there, he violated the order, which triggers an automatic arrest. Sal thinks it was a test. He wanted to see how fast we'd respond." Lena's hands tightened around her bag. The fear was back, cold and familiar, crawling up her spine like frost. She had spent weeks building a new life, brick by careful brick, and Derek was still out there, still circling, still looking for a crack in the wall. She called Victor. "He's out." "I know. Sal briefed me 10 minutes ago." "What do we do?" "We do nothing different. You go to work. You live your life. My team handles the security. Derek is a man who is running out of moves, and desperate men make mistakes. His next mistake will be his last." "You sound very sure about that." "Because I've already set the board. He just doesn't know it yet." Lena went to work. She treated patients, she ran codes, she saved lives. And in the quiet moments between emergencies, she pressed her hand against her growing belly and reminded herself that fear was a feeling, not a fact, and that she had survived worse than a man with a grudge and a bail bond. 3 days later, Derek made his last mistake. Lena was leaving the hospital after a night shift, walking through the staff parking garage with her keys in her hand when she heard footsteps behind her. Fast, purposeful, closing in. She turned and saw Derek 20 feet away, moving toward her with the glazed, manic energy of a man who had crossed every line and had nothing left to lose. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled, and his face carried the desperate fury of someone whose entire world had collapsed and who had decided to take someone else down with it. "You ruined my life," he said, his voice echoing off the concrete. "You destroyed everything I built. My business, my reputation, my name, all because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." Lena's hand found the panic button that Sal had given her, a small device clipped inside her bag. She pressed it without looking down. "Derek, you need to leave. You're violating the restraining order again." "I don't care about the restraining order. I don't care about any of it anymore." He was closer now, 10 feet. his hands curling into fists. You think your gangster boyfriend can protect you forever? You think this new life you've built is going to last? I'll burn it all down, Lena, every single piece of it. You already tried. It didn't work. Because I was playing nice. I was trying to do this the legal way. But you didn't want legal, did you? You wanted war. So fine, let's have a war. He lunged. Lena stepped sideways, and his hand caught her sleeve instead of her arm. She yanked free and stumbled backward, putting a concrete pillar between them. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. The panic button was sending a signal to Sal's team, but she didn't know how long it would take them to arrive. Seconds could be the difference between safety and catastrophe. Derek, stop. Think about what you're doing. There are cameras everywhere in this garage. Security will be here any second. Then I better make this quick. He came around the pillar, and Lena backed up against a car, her escape route narrowing. Derek's face was twisted into something she barely recognized. All pretense stripped away, the charming smile, the rehearsed tears, the polished performance. This was the real Derek Haynes. This was the man who lived beneath the mask. You're carrying his baby, Derek spat. Living in his apartment, sleeping in his bed. You were mine, Lena. Mine. I was never yours. The words hit him like a physical blow. He froze his chest, heaving his fists, trembling at his sides. And in that frozen moment, Lena saw something she had never seen in Derek's eyes before. Defeat, not rage, not calculation, not the strategic cruelty she had come to know so well. Just defeat. The bone-deep recognition that the thing he had gripped so tightly had slipped through his fingers for good. I loved you, he said, and his voice cracked. Maybe not the right way, maybe not the way you deserved, but I loved you. Love doesn't leave bruises, Derek. Tires screeched. 2 black SUVs ripped into the parking garage and skidded to a stop. Sal was out of the first vehicle before it fully stopped 2 of Victor's men behind him. Hospital security converged from the elevator bank radios crackling. Within seconds, Derek was surrounded by 6 men who had no intention of letting him take another step. Derek looked at the circle closing around him and laughed. It was a hollow, broken sound. Tell your boyfriend he wins, he said to Lena. Tell him he got everything. He didn't get me, Derek. I chose him. There's a difference, and the fact that you can't see it is exactly why we're here. The police arrived 4 minutes later. Derek was arrested for the second violation of the restraining order assault charges from the garage encounter and stalking. Diane Castellano was on the phone with the state's attorney before the handcuffs clicked shut, and by that evening, a judge had denied bail. Derek Haynes would remain in custody pending trial, with a sentence that could stretch into years. Victor arrived at the hospital 30 minutes after the arrest. Lena was sitting in the break room with a cup of tea that someone had pressed into her shaking hands, wrapped in a blanket that a kind nurse had draped over her shoulders. He walked in and knelt in front of her chair, his hands covering hers on the cup. Are you hurt? No, he didn't touch me. Sal said you stood your ground. He said you didn't run. I'm done running. Victor pressed his forehead against her hands. She felt the tension in his body, the barely restrained fury, the protective rage of a man who had promised to keep her safe and had come close to breaking that promise. She freed one hand and ran her fingers through his hair. I'm okay, she said. We're okay. He looked up, and she saw something in his eyes that she had been waiting to see without knowing it. Not the controlled calm, not the calculated intensity. Vulnerability, raw, unguarded, terrifying vulnerability from a man who had built an empire on never showing weakness. I love you, he said. I've known it since the night you told me you were pregnant and asked nothing from me. I've known it since you stood at that podium and told the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. I've known it every single day, and I haven't said it because I wanted to wait until you were standing on solid ground. But I can't wait anymore, Lena. I love you, and I love that child, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that love doesn't have to leave bruises. Lena set the cup down. She took his face in both hands and kissed him there in the break room of a hospital, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and burnt coffee and the quiet hum of machines keeping people alive. I love you too, she said against his lips. And for the record, the ground has been solid for a while now. You just couldn't see it, because you were too busy trying to be noble. He laughed, and it was the fullest, warmest laugh she had ever heard from him, the laugh of a man who had finally put down something heavy. 2 months later, Lena Marlowe stood in the trauma unit of Northwestern Memorial Hospital and delivered a set of orders that saved a motorcyclist's life. She was 6 months pregnant, her scrubs stretched tight over her belly, her feet swollen, and her hair escaping from its bun in every direction. She was magnificent. Victor picked her up after her shift, the way he did every night. Nico drove. Marco sat in the passenger seat. The city rolled past the windows, the same city that had watched her at her lowest and had seen her rise. Derek's trial date was set today, Victor said. Diane thinks the prosecution has an airtight case. Between the security footage, the text messages, the ER records, and the parking garage incident, his attorney is already pushing for a plea deal. What kind of deal? 5 years, no parole. Lena absorbed this in silence. 5 years. 5 years of freedom from the man who had stolen 2 years of her life. It wasn't enough, and it was everything. Take the deal, Victor asked. Take the deal. She leaned against his shoulder as the car moved through the city. Her hand rested on her belly, where their daughter was performing her nightly gymnastics routine. Victor placed his hand over hers, and she felt the baby kick against his palm. She's strong, he said. She gets it from her mother. She gets it from both of you. Lena looked up at him. This man who had caught her when she fell and held on even when holding on was dangerous. This man who had looked at a desperate woman in a borrowed dress and seen not a problem to be solved, but a person to be protected. This man who had chosen her child before the child even had a name. I was thinking about names, she said. Tell me. Elena, after your mother. Victor went very still. His hand tightened over hers on her belly, and when he spoke, his voice was rough, with an emotion he made no attempt to hide. She would be honored. She already knows. I called her this morning. She cried for 20 minutes and then told me I needed to eat more pasta. Victor pressed his lips to her temple and held them there. That sounds exactly right. The car pulled up to the building on Lakeshore Drive. Their building now, not his. Victor had put her name on the deed 3 weeks ago without telling her. And she had found out when Diane casually mentioned it during a legal review. Lena had spent 15 minutes yelling at him about making unilateral decisions, and Victor had stood there taking it with the patient expression of a man who knew he had done the right thing and was willing to endure the consequences. They rode the elevator to the 42nd floor. Nico and Marco took their positions in the hallway. Victor opened the door, and Lena walked into the apartment that smelled like fresh flowers and the Thai food Victor had ordered before picking her up. She kicked off her shoes. She sank onto the couch. She pressed both hands against her belly and felt Elena kick twice hard and certain as if announcing her presence to the world. Lena Marlowe had walked into a ballroom 5 months ago wearing a borrowed dress and carrying the weight of a life she had never chosen. She had kissed a stranger out of desperation and found something she had stopped believing existed. She had stood before cameras and spoken the truth that her abuser had tried to bury. She had faced him in a parking garage and refused to bend. She had reclaimed her career, her identity, her voice, and her future. She was a trauma nurse. She was a survivor. She was a mother. She was loved by a man who understood that strength and tenderness were not opposites, but the same thing expressed differently. And she was free. Completely, irrevocably, unbreakably free.